Hello, Shalom, and Charete YouTube. This is Philip on Water here. Did you know that there is a discrepancy between Matthew 12:21 and the actual quote from Isaiah that Matthew 12:21 is quoting from Isaiah 42, verse 4? So Matthew 12:21 and its quote of Isaiah 42, it says, "And in his name, Gentiles will trust." In his name, Gentiles will trust. But in the actual quote from Isaiah 42, it says, "And the coastlands shall wait for his law." So that's very different. Now, the coastlands could refer to the Gentiles. So this isn't really the problem. The problem is, in Matthew, it says, "In his name, Gentiles will trust." And in the quote from Isaiah, it says, "And the coastlands shall wait for his law." So why does this happen? Well, it turns out that in Greek, the spelling for name and law is very similar. So let me show you. In the Nestle Aland 28th edition of Matthew's text, it reads in Greek, "Ke to onomati avtu ethne elpiusin." So it says, "And in his name," onomati, this is from the Greek word onoma, so in his name, the nations will hope. That's what it says in Matthew. Now, if you look at Rahlfs' version of the Septuagint, it agrees with what Matthew says here, actually. It says, "Ke epito onomati avtu ethne elpiusin." So it says the same thing. However, if you look at the Gottingen version of Isaiah, instead of Rahlfs' version of Isaiah, it says something different in the Gottingen version. By the way, the Gottingen edition of the Septuagint is the best version we have that uses all the manuscript data, so it's better than Rahlfs' version. And it says, "Ke epito nomo avtu ethne elpiusin." So it says, "And upon his law, nations will hope." Upon his law. Now, if you notice here, the difference is very subtle. We have really the core letters are the same. You have nom. You have nom each time. So you have nom here, so nomo, and then you have nom here. And Rahlfs again, you have onomati. And so the only difference is there's some letters added around. So it looks very similar. So maybe you can explain that the reason why the text was changed from law to name was because scribes were looking at the Greek text, and because of a dialectical shift or for some reason, they understood the text as just saying name instead of law. So what do the Dead Sea Scrolls and MT say? Well, the Masoretic Text, or the MT, says Torah. It says law. So it says ula torato, ula torato, and in his law, the coastlands, or the nations, you could say, will put their hope. So Torah is the word for law in Hebrew, and that's very different from the word in Hebrew for name, which would be shame, right? So you can't explain the difference in terms of the Hebrew if you're looking at the MT. The Dead Sea Scrolls say the same thing as the MT, so there's not really anything new we can glean from that. So one final thing that I need to add to this is that if you add the definite article to nomos in Greek, the word for law, it would be onomos. And so this is literally the law. So it's very easy to see how a scribe may have somehow confused, maybe some manuscript tradition, instead of reading tal nomo, it read something like onomos or onomon or something. And then because there's no spaces in original manuscripts in Greek, apparently a scribe saw this and mistook it for onomos, which somehow ended up as being onomati. And so t as well is also can be a separate word in Greek. And so there is some confusion here, and I'm not saying that I have a perfect scenario of how this happened, but given all of these circumstances and the way the language works like this, it seems very likely that a scribe saw something like this and somehow it ended up becoming onomati, which is really the only way to explain it. Again, the words in Hebrew look nothing alike, shame and Torah. So this had to have happened somehow in the Greek manuscript tradition. So basically what we have here, to summarize, is we have the MT and the Dead Sea Scrolls both say law, in agreement with the Gottingen edition, which is a better edition of the Septuagint that uses more Greek manuscripts. Whereas Rahlfs, which is using far fewer Greek manuscripts for its critical edition, it says name in agreement with Matthew. Now, the word in Hebrew for name is shame, which would be very different in appearance from Torah. So it is more likely that what happened here is that a scribe in the Greek, somewhere in the Greek line of manuscripts, a scribe misunderstood normal for name and changed it a little bit to be spelt as name, and that's how we end up with the reading we find in Matthew. So what does this mean? What this means is that Matthew uses a reading that's based on a textual corruption of the Greek. It's not even related to the Hebrew per se. It's a textual corruption from the Greek. So in other words, there are inspired errors in the Bible, you could say. Now, of course, I don't think it's an error. I wouldn't call it an error. It's more like an inspired, different interpretational tradition. I would rather put it that way. But what this shows is that you really have to understand the Greek and the Hebrew to see what's going on sometimes and why translations are different. It's not an error. It's because it can be explained, and it's because you have these different interpretational traditions. So in other words, this is an example where the MT isn't wrong. I've been saying in a lot of my past videos, abandon the MT. Well, I say that in a very general sense. When the Dead Sea Scrolls are better, yeah, we should look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the MT is still helpful and useful at times. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and please also consider joining my Patreon. On my Patreon, I have some Greek and Hebrew Bible projects and some homeschooling resources that I've been working on. Thank you, and keep seeking the truth.